What's up everybody, I'm HoopsandHipHop. So I am a huge fan of lore and story in video games. They provide an interesting, immersive, and captivating experience as you, the player, unravel their mysteries. Now these types of qualities don't necessarily apply to Pokemon games, but they do have some very deep and interesting pieces of lore that have been getting more intricate as time goes on. So today I am going to be counting down the top 5 pieces of Pokemon lore in my opinion. I tried to construct this list without using some of the super big and obvious pieces of lore for the sake of keeping the video interesting, so these pieces of lore are going to be the ones that I personally am most intrigued by, regardless of how well known they are. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Number 5 on this list comes from the books of the Sinnoh Library. In the library, there are many books that describe many different stories throughout the Pokemon world's history. The one we are highlighting here at number 5 are a pair of Sinnoh folk stories. Now the Sinnoh folk stories are just that, folk stories, and numbers 2 and 3 give a particularly interesting insight into the development of Pokemon as a species. Starting with folk story 3, it reads as follows. There once were Pokemon that became very close to humans. There once were humans and Pokemon that ate together at the same table. It was a time when there existed no differences to distinguish the two. It's also worth noting that the original Japanese version of this story described Pokemon and people marrying each other at one point in time. If we follow that up with folk story 2, which states, there lived a Pokemon in the forest. In the forest, the Pokemon shed its hide to sleep as a human. Awakened, the human dons the Pokemon hide to roam villages. When we take both of these stories into consideration, we learn that Pokemon at one point were nearly identical to humans and maybe were even a form of humans themselves before they started to evolve into what we know today. Now that seems really crazy considering how different Pokemon are to humans, but the fact that it's apparently a thing is also really interesting. Next up at number 4 is another story from the Sinnoh Library. Now this shouldn't be too much of a surprise considering Sinnoh's entire plotline was centered around mythology, and I'm glad that it was because it provides some great insight into the Pokemon world. The story titled Sinnoh Region's Mythology actually gives a canonical explanation to one of the more iconic features of the Pokemon games. It reads as follows. Long ago, when Sinnoh had just been made, Pokemon and humans led separate lives. That is not to say they did not help each other. No, indeed they did. They supplied each other with goods and supported each other. A Pokemon proposed to the others to always be ready to help humans. It asked that Pokemon be ready to appear before humans always. Thus, to this day, Pokemon appear to us if we venture into tall grass. Now I really enjoyed this one because it offers an interesting backstory to one of the simplest parts of a Pokemon game that could easily just be chalked up to a game mechanic. It shows an effort on the part of Game Freak to really flesh out the world that they've created instead of just resting on their laurels, and little bits of lore like this really help to add depth to an already great world. Next up is one that we don't really have all the answers to, and that's the mystery of the unknown. Ever since their inception in Generation 2, everyone knew that they were very mysterious and had more going on with them than was being led on. Then in Generation 4, we found out that they have some sort of relationship with Arceus, and given that Arceus created the universe, that's kind of a big deal. Finally, just the simple fact that they're shaped like letters of the alphabet is enough to pique anyone's interest. In fact, according to some of the Unknown's Pokédex entries, it's actually possible that the Unknown were what inspired the modern alphabet in the Pokemon world instead of the other way around. It's clear that the Unknown have played a very important role in the history of the Pokemon world, but despite that, we still don't know much about what that role truly is. A little mystery always makes for a good story, and the Unknown have certainly provided that in the Pokemon games. At the runner-up spot is the story of Seemaville. Now I absolutely love this little bit of backstory because it provides a very dark look into the recent past of the Hoenn region. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, you can find Seemaville sitting abandoned along Route 108, and after a little bit of exploring, you'll realize that there was a lot more going on in Hoenn than just the exploits of Team Magma and Aqua. Among other things, the leftover documents at Seemaville paint a grim picture that explains that the location used to be the site of a cult-like workforce that abused and likely killed Pokemon in order to develop their life force into infinity energy for the Devon Corporation. It gets even deeper though, as letters from a young Professor Cosmo can be found that reveal that his father was a researcher on this project, and that all his time away from his family actually caused his marriage to fall apart. Even though this is something that is completely optional in terms of the story of Oraz, this has to be the most mature piece of lore that we've ever seen from a Pokemon game, and I honestly hope that we can see more in the future. And my personal favorite piece of lore from the Pokemon games is the new Multiverse concept that was introduced to us in Oraz. The reason why it's my favorite is because it changes the entire landscape of Pokemon as we know it. Time travel and parallel universes are always fun things in storytelling, and having it in the world of Pokemon opens up so many possibilities for future installments. The other thing I really enjoy is that Game Freak actually used this to give a canonical explanation for the lack of Mega Evolution in the previous games. This goes back to what I discussed earlier about Game Freak, but they could have easily just attributed it to the growth of the franchise and not worried about tying in the older games into the bigger picture of Pokemon. However, the fact that they did shows their commitment to this franchise, and it sets Pokemon up for some incredible games in the near future. So there we have it. The Pokemon world doesn't get a whole lot of interesting lore like this, but it has been popping up more and more recently, and oftentimes it'll just come out of nowhere, so it was fun to be able to highlight some of my personal favorites. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and let me know down in the comments below what your favorite piece of Pokemon lore is. As always, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe because I upload great Pokemon content every Tuesday and Saturday, and as always, until the next one, I will smell you guys later.